Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are unraveling a literal biological detective story. And honestly, it's going to completely change how you view a totally common, everyday bodily function. We're talking about a hidden history that spans hundreds of thousands of years. But here's the wild part. Almost everything we think we know about it today, it's really only based on the last single century. Let's dive in. Now, to really wrap our heads around this, I want to anchor us in our modern reality just for a second. Think about it. Right now, somewhere in your bathroom drawer, there's probably a box of tampons, maybe some pads, or a menstrual cup. You likely grabbed it at the store and didn't even think twice about it, right? It's just there. Kind of like how toilet paper or toothpaste is just there. But for 99.9% of human history, absolutely none of that existed. No pharmacies, zero manufactured cotton. For over 300,000 years, every woman who ever lived dealt with the exact same biological reality using literally nothing but what she could pull from the earth. So, how did they do it? And actually, more importantly, how often did they do it? Well, the answer is pretty staggering.
All right, Section 1, the 400 cycle difference.
So, a modern woman living in an industrialized country today will menstruate roughly 450 times in her lifetime. That's about 40 years of monthly cycles. But our ancient ancestors? They lived a completely different biological reality. Anthropologist Beverly Strassman actually studied the Dogon people of Mali, which is a population living largely without modern contraception, and she found that Dogon women menstruated only about 100 times in their entire lives. And get this, researchers looking at traditional hunter-gatherer populations, they've put that number even lower. 50. Just 50. I really want to pause and let the shock of that incredibly low number sink in. 50 periods in an entire lifetime compared to 450 today. It is a massive difference. The monthly cycle that modern women experience, every single month of their adult lives, was actually a remarkably rare event for the vast majority of human history. Moving on to Section 2, the math of ancient motherhood. To understand why this is, we have to look at the biological math of how our ancestors actually lived. It all starts right at the beginning of adulthood. In the US today, the average age of a girl's first period is around 12 years old. But in hunter-gatherer societies, it was much closer to 16 or 17. Why? Well, it all comes down to body fat. You see, the human reproductive system needs a very specific threshold of energy reserves just to switch on. Ancient girls were incredibly lean. They're walking miles every single day foraging for food, and they really only ate when food was actually available. Their bodies simply didn't have that high caloric surplus required to trigger menstruation early in life. So for those first 16 or 17 years, periods weren't even part of the equation. And then, once they finally did begin, a very distinct timeline just sort of took over. A young woman would typically get pregnant within a year or two. Right away, that's 9 months of gestation with zero menstruation. Then comes childbirth, which is followed by intense breastfeeding. And guys, I mean intense. Among the Kung people of the Kalahari Desert, mothers breastfed on demand. We're talking sometimes dozens of times a day for 3 to 4 years straight. After those years were up, she might have a few menstrual cycles before getting pregnant again, and then this entire loop would just repeat itself 5, 6, or even 7 times. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the precise biological mechanism behind that loop. It's called lactational amenorrhea. Basically, this intense, constant nursing triggered the body to produce massive amounts of the hormone prolactin. And prolactin acts like a giant natural pause button. It suppresses ovulation entirely. And no ovulation means no period. So because of this natural rhythm, some ancient women literally went years, or even a full decade, without a single menstrual cycle. Okay, jumping into Section 3, moss, lodges, and ochre. So how did women manage the few periods they actually did have using only what the earth provided? Well, our ancestors were incredibly resourceful. Sphagnum moss was super highly prized because, get this, it can naturally absorb up to 20 times its own weight in liquid. Women would pack it between their legs or wrap it in really soft animal skins. In drier climates, they'd use dried grass or bark fibers. But honestly, perhaps most importantly, many ethnographic accounts show that women simply wore dark skirts or just allowed the blood to flow freely while they went about their day. There was absolutely no cultural expectation to conceal or hide it. It was just blood. And this brings us to one of the biggest myths we still hold on to about the past. The modern assumption is that when ancient women retreated to so-called menstrual huts, they were being banished or punished for being somehow unclean. But the anthropological record completely debunks this. Totally untrue. These lodges were actually places of spiritual power, profound concentration, and frankly, a desperately needed retreat. For example, look at the Yorick people of Northern California. A menstruating woman was actually seen as being at the absolute height of her spiritual power. She stepped away from daily tasks, not because she was contaminated, no way, but because her energy was considered almost too intense for ordinary life. And for the Kalasha people of Pakistan, their communal lodge, which is called the Bashali, was a total sanctuary. Women gathered there, they shared stories, laughed, and just rested, while the men and children managed the household. I mean, for women who worked relentlessly from dawn to dusk, this biological event was literally the only built-in break they ever got. But the influence of this biological cycle might actually go even deeper than just communal rest. It might be the root of human culture itself. This is the Female Cosmetic Coalition's hypothesis, which was proposed by anthropologists Camilla Power and Chris Knight. Across archaeological sites in Africa dating back over 100,000 years, we find red ochre smeared on tools, bones, and cave walls. This hypothesis suggests that early human women painted their skin with this red pigment to simulate or amplify the visual signal of menstrual blood. If this is true, it means the very first symbolic act of art in human history wasn't just random decoration, it was a collective social signal meant to look like blood. How wild is that? All right, Section 4, a World War I invention. Let's move forward a bit and see how this all builds into the modern era. In medieval Europe, women used washable rags, which, fun fact, is actually where the phrase on the rag comes from. But the massive shift, that happened during World War I. French nurses noticed that the new cellulose bandages they were using on soldiers' wounds absorbed blood incredibly well. Yes, literally the exact same stuff used for battlefield wounds. After the war, the Kimberly-Clark Company took that exact same bandage material and invented disposable Kotex in 1920. So, within just a single century, this communal, natural practice that defined human history for millennia was entirely replaced by a disposable, plastic-wrapped product that we buy in total silence. Which brings us to Section 5, the evolutionary mismatch. Now, here is the dramatic medical twist. Evolutionary biologists have a specific name for what modern women experience today. They call it an evolutionary mismatch. See, the female body was forged over hundreds of thousands of years for frequent pregnancy and years of breastfeeding. It was built for a life where the ovaries rarely cycled. It was absolutely not built for decades of uninterrupted monthly ovulation. So, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the actual mechanics of this mismatch. Every single time ovulation occurs, it triggers cell division in the ovaries. And in biology, every cell division is basically a chance for a cellular mutation. Because modern women have 450 cycles instead of 50, they experience massive, massive amounts of cell division compared to our ancient ancestors. Researchers have actually linked this dramatically higher number of lifetime ovulations to increased rates of ovarian and endometrial cancers. These are conditions that were virtually non-existent in ancestral populations. And this leads to a truly fascinating medical paradox. The hormonal birth control pill, which obviously suppresses ovulation, actually lowers the risk of these specific cancers. Why? Well, not because it's some magic cure-all, but because it accidentally mimics the biological baseline of human history. By pausing ovulation, the pill essentially recreates that rare ovulation hormonal pattern that ancient women naturally experienced through constant pregnancy and breastfeeding. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. For 300,000 years, this cycle was rare, it was communal, and it was deeply woven into the everyday social fabric of humanity. Women rested, they gathered, and they just let their bodies do what bodies naturally do. Today, we've transported it into this hidden, monthly nuisance that we are culturally conditioned to keep totally quiet about. So what does this all mean? Are we hiding a biological history we never even knew we lost? It definitely changes how you look at that box in your bathroom drawer, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this as fascinating as I did, take this knowledge with you, and I'll see you next time.